Speaker is from Wageningen University. I hope I pronounce it right. And that's Dr. Simon Bush. Let me give a brief introduction. He is an associate professor at the Environmental Policy Group of Wageningen University. His research focuses on both public and private environmental governance arrangements for fisheries and aquaculture. His recent publications have looked at the role of eco-certification, fishery credit systems, and entrepreneurial marine protected areas. He is currently the principal investigator for two major projects in the Western and Central Pacific and Indonesia, looking at the relationship between government and business in the sustainable management of tuna fisheries. Ladies and gentlemen, to give a hand to welcome Dr. Simon Bush.
Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. And it is a terribly difficult name to pronounce. Wageningen University. It's terrible. I'm Australian, but I'm working at a Dutch university, and sometimes these words take a bit of getting used to. Thank you very much to the organisers for inviting us to speak at this wonderful conference. It's really a pleasure and an honour for us as a research program at a university, and not only at one university I might add, but a range of universities across Indonesia, the Philippines and the Western Pacific, to give you some idea about the kind of research that we're currently undertaking around this very complex problem of transboundary tuna. I think the speakers today, of course, have painted the complexity around this particular fishery very clearly. And of course, there are many experts in the room which know the details of the complex and also great big challenge that we're facing. Now, the program that I'm going to present today, we haven't got so many results yet, but what we do have is ongoing research, and this is based on 10 PhD students, most of which are here today, and I'll point their names out to you as we go along. The title of the program is Benefiting from Innovations in Sustainable and Equitable Management of Transboundary Tuna in the Western Pacific. And that's a little bit different, I think, to what we've been hearing a lot about today. We've gone into the biology, we've gone into food safety, but we haven't gone so much into what we might call governance. And that is, how can we start to not only manage these tuna stocks, but understand the ways in which public and private actors come together and form partnerships, and in doing so steer tuna through to or towards more sustainable fishing practices. Now, I might add, I think this is a very well-matching topic given the theme of the conference, shared resources and of course shared responsibilities. And it's not only shared responsibilities in terms of between countries that we're pointing out in a program like this, but also shared responsibilities between public and private actors. Now, here we go. So this is really at the core of our program. Our program is really interested in public actors, governments and private sector, and how these two groups, so companies and governments, in many different kinds of constellations of partnerships, can form partnerships which contribute to the sustainability of tuna on the one hand, but also, of course, more equitable outcomes for fishing communities across the region. So we're looking at these partnerships and how they can reach benefits in these two lines of thinking. Now, our program is based around this kind of logic. We're first of all interested in understanding the social and ecological interactions associated with tuna fisheries. How do fishermen and tuna interact? That's our first point. Second, we want to design. We want to contribute to the design of effective and equitable governance arrangements to achieve sustainable tuna management. And that really comes back to that public and private partnership idea. Thirdly, we're looking to develop an effective global long-term network of scientists around the region. And the universities that we're engaging here next to Wageningen University from the Netherlands, it's a long way away. We're working with the University of the Philippines in Visayas, the University of the Philippines in Mindanao, University of the South Pacific, and also Bogor University in Indonesia. But we're developing that network. And we're also mobilising knowledge, this is why we're here today also, around these results that we're going to be generating and contributing back to industry partners as well as governments in the region. So we have different research areas, and I'll go through these quite quickly. Now you'll notice at the middle of this diagram, this slide, we have a fisherman. And here we're very interested in decision making. We're interested in what's going to influence fishermen's decision making, and we've got questions to answer this. First of all, what private initiatives are out there? We're talking about MSC, we're talking about ISSF, we're talking about FIPS, these kinds of initiatives, and we've heard about some of them today. We're also interested in how cooperation occurs between governments and these private initiatives. We're interested also in what happens in value chains. We've heard a bit about value chains today, the difficulties, or let's say the dominance of some of these companies which are leading these value chains in setting objectives for only selling sustainable products over the next 3 or 4 years. This is a very influential factor that we're taking into consideration in our research. What does this mean for countries like the Philippines? We're also interested in the FADs. How do FADs and fishermen interact? Because this is, of course, at the very heart of a lot of what we've been talking about. And Mr. Jake Liu was, of course, giving us a very nice presentation earlier about the complexities of handline, purseine, and these FADs. And also we're interested in information. What kinds of information do these private initiatives require? Do they simply build upon existing state data collection systems, or are they putting further demands on countries like the Philippines to deliver information which currently isn't at hand? And therefore, new practices for data collection are required. So these are the different research focus areas that we're interested in this program. Now I think I've gone over this just to illustrate that it's a very global project. We have partners from all around the place. We also have our International Advisory Board and other research partners from Australia, from the US, from Europe. But here's really where we're interested in. We're interested in Indonesia, the Philippines, and the Western Pacific. And of course, that's what we've been hearing about all today. Now I just want to run through three examples which will hopefully illustrate some of the key questions that we're interested in. Now, as I said, we don't have too many results at the moment, and that's a shame, but we're only 2 years into the project. 2 years is a lot of time, I agree, but we're basing this on PhD research, and these guys take 4 years to collect their data and to analyse the results. Having said that, some of our first papers are starting to come out. Now, one of the first things we're looking at is traceability. This example comes from Indonesia. Now, the point here is we're looking at what we're calling information-rich traceability, and this links also back to some of the things we've heard about the Filipino initiatives to try and develop consumer-facing traceability through WWF, but also, of course, in response to the yellow card that everyone in the room is extremely aware of. In Indonesia, we see a similar set of problem associated with collecting information, but also collecting information through the government system. There are limitations to the extent to which the government has been able to collect data, especially around small-scale fisheries. So what we're doing here is we're looking at how initiatives which have emerged from private actors, in this case companies and NGOs, to collect that information and to feed it into government databases. Now, of course, this is a new development in terms of data collection for tuna. Companies and NGOs providing services to the government, and that government then passing that information onto the WCPFC. So what we're looking in research terms is what is the incentive for these companies to deliver this information? And when they do deliver this information, is it accurate? Is it timely? And is it accessible and understandable to a broad range of actors, a broad range of stakeholders in these fisheries? Now, the example from Indonesia involves Anova Seafoods from the United States and MDPI, which is a relatively new NGO in Indonesia. Now, they're enumerating a couple of handline fisheries, one in Ambon and one in Lombok, and their workers are then passing this information into the iFish database. Now, the iFish database is a database which is to be developed through a USAID-funded program, but it's now been split. One version of that database has gone to the government, the other database has gone to a range of stakeholders, and they are non-governmental stakeholders. So what happens with that non-governmental information? Well, it comes back to what's being called a data management committee. Now, government's in there as well, but this is being steered predominantly as a co-management initiative between the government and these private actors. So we have private companies and NGOs feeding this information into data management committees to improve decision making around the fishery in Indonesia, in these places. But of course, when we're talking about incentives associated with collecting that data, incentives come from a market. And in order to be recognised for all that good work you're doing in enumerating, sampling these fisheries, we have to have some level of transparency around those enumeration practices. And that's why we've linked this enumeration program that was already there to this idea of information-rich traceability. Now, we've done that through another partner, and this partner is This Fish. Actually quite interesting, Mr. Jake Liu had a video earlier in his presentation of some handline fisheries, and that video of handline fisheries was actually filmed in our project, so you'll see some of the same colours coming back. And I'm really, really glad you were using that video, because it's something we really invested in. I think it does make clearer to the general public and to consumers what is handline tuna, what is handline tuna fisheries, because most consumers have no idea. And that's what this is all about. It's creating a traceability program where you'll tag a tuna, a company will tag a tuna, the company will then enter that data, they'll handle and ship their tuna, and eventually a consumer is able to use a smartphone or a computer to enter a code, and they'll be able to get information about where that tuna was caught, how that tuna was caught, and who was involved in catching and trading it. And in giving that recognition to the people who have caught, traded and sold that tuna through to a consumer market, you're also giving recognition to the enumeration program that they've put in place. And that's the basic idea. Now, we haven't proven this concept yet, I might add, it's still ongoing, but this is one of the things we're testing in an action research orientation. Now, just to add a little bit more detail, we haven't got our tuna page up yet. It is coming very shortly. We've got the video, but not the page. But you'll be able to look into this kind of level of detail with our handline fisheries, first of all in Ambon and in Lombok, but we're looking to expand to other places as well. So you'll get a map of where it is, and you'll be able to click through into each level of the value chain and find information about catch documentation, where it came from, who caught it, etc., etc. Now, the key here is that we're looking to link two systems. We understand the state system of data collection. We understand that, I would argue. Governments collect information, in the case of Indonesia, at the subnational level, goes through to the national level, in this case PAXI, who would then pass it on to the regional level, WCPFC. Now, by bringing in these private actors, what we're trying to do is have these NGOs passing information through to this database, the This Fish database, but also making sure it goes through the iFish database into the government's system. But again, we've got questions. If it goes into This Fish, what information goes into This Fish, and how does that feed back into helping fishermen again make decisions about where and how they're catching fish? Likewise for a company like Anova. And ultimately, we're also interested in if that information goes into that subnational system, how is it fed back to fishermen and to companies? So again, what kind of partnerships can we develop through this idea of information-rich traceability? Now, a second case, and this brings us to the Philippines, is actually reflecting the work of Fraser Tolentino, who's over here. We also have Edison Marcuzzi, who's working on Filipino purseine fisheries and handline fisheries here in General Santos, but this is some of Fraser's work. And she's looking at fishery improvement projects. Now, luckily I can go over this quickly because we've heard about fishery improvement projects already this morning. In fact, Fraser's looking into the Mindoro case. But just to give you an idea why we think this is so interesting. Again, FIPs are not directly run by governments. They're run through public-private partnerships. There's a market argument for why improvement in a fishery is necessary, because people want to make claims in the market. Fishermen want to make claims, companies want to make claims in the market, either to access that market or to receive a higher price for the fish that they're selling. Again, we don't know if this necessarily happens everywhere, but this is the idea in theory. So we're looking at a value chain approach here, again with public and private actors involved, and they can be NGO-led. We also see some examples where they're company-led. So there's a range of these different approaches. And some, as we've heard also, I think Corey Peet was mentioning earlier as well through the ASEAN framework for FIPS, some of them are oriented towards MSc, but I think there's a question mark there. Do all FIPS have to be oriented towards MSc? If we are going to have this large market, as Corey was pointing out, within ASEAN, we also need to understand if FIPS are only oriented towards certification or whether they can be implemented in other contexts that don't lead to MSc certification. So I won't go over many of the details because it's a case which is ongoing, other than to say, and I know I've got that acronym wrong, I'm very, very sorry about that, but I think it's the PPSTS, yes. It's a fishing organisation, so there's a degree of organisation by fishermen in order to try and improve their fishing practices and by doing so move towards a market goal, in this case MSc. But what the research of Frazen shows is that there are other incentives at play here. Fishermen aren't just looking for MSc certification. By organising and orienting themselves towards a market goal, they're actually receiving more attention than they previously did from the government. So they're getting more resources, they're getting more attention, and as a result, improvement is occurring in more than simply just orienting towards a price premium in the market. What her work also shows that it's very important to look at the value chain and the relations between traders and fishermen in that value chain. Because cussers play a double role. They're middlemen, they're interested in trade, but they're also providing a very important social welfare function. They're providing credit, they're providing services to those communities. So it's important that we learn within FIPS and within value chain approaches from her research how these cussers can be also brought into models which orient towards the market but also maintain that important social welfare function. And of course there's a fine line there. But what her research is really showing is that you can't learn everything from one particular FIP because all FIPs are different. They're a very interesting tool because they do link public and private actors, but they also very vary. So we need to understand better from more case studies exactly what and why, what they're trying to aim for and why people are interested, people being fishers and companies at that local level, why are they interested in improving? Really, what are the incentives they're looking for? And ultimately, we think that MSc perhaps isn't the only goal for these FIPs. But if it isn't the only goal, what are the other goals? Now the third case takes us from Indonesia and the Philippines out into the Pacific. And there's another set of students, actually we have a number of students working on this, but the two I'm going to draw on from today is Stephen Adolf and Agnes Yeating. Now their work is focused on the PNA and it's focused around cooperation between the PNA members as a result again of these innovative public-private arrangements that have been put in place. And I know we have our members from the PNA here as well. Now this is extremely innovative. It's one of the very first examples where we have a group of countries, a regional group or a sub-regional group of countries who are partnering with a company in order to market their fish. Now, this may lead to certain benefits for those countries, but there might be unintended consequences or perhaps even disbenefits for others. And again, in order to understand how effective these partnerships can be, we have to explore those, and that's what we're trying to do. So, we're looking at what the payoff is for cooperation as stimulated by the MSc certification of unassociated fur seining in the Western Pacific. Does it lead to further cooperation, or are there some problems currently with cooperation between the PNA countries which has been in some way affected by certification, the certification process? That's a question that we're looking into. We're also interested in what the payoffs are for companies to be involved, because I think many of us may in the room know that although there is an MSc certification in that PNA fishery, there have been some very serious problems in getting product to market. There may also be some intended or unintended consequences for other companies involved, particularly Filipino companies. What role are they playing? What payoffs are they getting for their involvement? And what other actors in, let's say, the global production network around tuna are also playing a role here? MSc is one NGO that we see involved here, but we also see some interaction with other NGOs like Earth Island Institute, which perhaps are also hindering or making that certification process problematic. But of course we also have to understand that we might put a lot of effort and a lot of investment in a program like MSc, But the impact may only be partial. It will only ever be partial, but how partial is that impact going to be? Given that fads are not going to go away, and perhaps they shouldn't even go away. So how do we balance those two fisheries together? And again, we're looking at some of those questions. So looking forward, I hope I've given you just a very, very small insight into some of the questions that we're asking in this program. And just to emphasise again that we're really interested in how we're moving beyond simply government control and management of these fisheries to look at all the very interesting ways that private actors, companies and NGOs working in partnership are also contributing to sustainable fisheries governance, tuna governance in the Western and Central Pacific, including the Philippines and Indonesia, of course. So we see a range of different initiatives emerging through this region, but what we really see is a lot of experimentation. We see no final answers, and we don't think there are any silver bullets from the research that we've done so far. It's always going to be some kind of mosaic of different approaches that are going to make up and contribute to sustainable management from the private sector side. And ultimately, we still need governments, because governments have a very high degree of legitimacy, and they have a high degree of control and power. So we need to not only look at how private sector is working, but how those partnerships are being developed and feedback mechanisms are being developed between these private actors, companies and NGOs, with governments. And ultimately, we need to know if this is going to be a success and a failure, and what the conditions are going to be if we want to succeed in promoting sustainable practices and decision-making by fishermen through these mechanisms. So I'd like to put out there a call for cooperation. We're 2 years into this program. That means we have 2 to 3 years left. Our students are running around the region. I hope some of you have met them already. They're working in Indonesia, the Philippines, and through the Western Pacific. They're always asking for access to information, for interviews, so we'd like to put out there a call for cooperation with our students and our extended research networks. But of course, I think a call for cooperation also has a double meaning perhaps, and we're also looking to help promote and stimulate what we see are really progressive forms of cooperation between, again, companies, NGOs and governments towards this broader goal of sustainable tuna. So, daghang salamat.
Thank you very much. Dr. Simon Bush, thank you for such a well-delivered talk. You have provided us a framework that sustainable and equitable management is indeed imperative to continued development. I'd like to remind you that our next open forum will be after the last 2 speakers. And so you can start writing down your